This book reveals a mental magic that assures success, that absolutely guarantees increased achievement. Whether your profession is in the arts or business, in science or sales, in sports, war, or politics, here you will learn the secret way in which your mind is tied to the source of all power. You will learn how you are capable of becoming anything and doing anything you can visualize. Every man's consciousness is constantly changing, is trapped at the knife-edge overlap of past and future, reacts rather than acts, is incomplete and partial, eternally seeks itself. For since the mere state of being throws no light on that state, consciousness learns of itself through reaction to outside stimuli. If a man comes to believe he is unsuccessful, it is because he carries the impression he has been unsuccessful. And this conclusion, once adopted, inescapably molds him into the shape of the thing he believes, locks him in a prison of his own making. The magic by which a man becomes free is imagination. By training himself to cast up mental pictures of the thing he desires, by resisting sensual stimuli, even envisaging the exact opposite, he tends to assume a factual position in accordance with his vision. For his vision then becomes his experience, rather than the sensual stimuli that moved him before. Consciousness always assumes a form to suit its knowledge of itself. And where such knowledge breaks beyond the limits imposed by sensory experience, man begins to grow into the image of the secret self. There is only one mind in all creation. That mind is in everyone, is in its true state of being, not confined to anyone, not confined to the body. It is a central knowing consciousness in which everything dwells, which dwells in everything. In a bodily confined state, it assumes the limitations imposed upon it by the knowledge of itself, which it receives through the senses. But when bondage to those senses is broken by development of an inner power to perceive and know directly, then slavery to its embodiment is at an end. Perfect action and perfect works stem from an inner conviction of the mental cause behind all things. A man changes the state of his outer world by first changing the state of his inner world. Everything that comes to him from outside is the result of his own consciousness. When he changes that consciousness, he alters his perception, and thus the world he sees. By coming to a clear understanding of the process and effect of mental imagery, he is led irrevocably along the correct path to his goal. By working with this cause of all things, his own consciousness, he achieves infallibility in works. For inasmuch as his mental imagery propels him into action, that action is always true to the picture in his mind and will deliver him its material counterpart certainly. In this book, you will find a program for training the image power of the mind, so that a scene or situation cast up in consciousness will arrive in 3 dimensions, with color and sound, pulsing with life, as real for you as the outside world. Haven't you ever dreamed such dreams? Haven't you sometimes in sleep become immersed in a mental and spiritual world with such solidity and dimension that you were certain it was real, in the material world a delusion? If ever you have known the overwhelming power of mental imagery to influence your attitude and perception, then you will quickly see that the salvation of each of us is to train his image power to obey him. In this manner, it is possible to become free from the promptings and urgings of nature, from death and disease and destruction, from ineffectuality and frustration. For the man whose inner power of vision transcends the constantly distracting stimuli of the outer world, has taken charge of his own life, is truly master of his fate. Chapter 1. The Hidden Cause of All Things. Shakespeare's Hamlet, in his famed soliloquy, pondered, to be or not to be, and thus faced squarely the primary challenge of life. Most people only exist, never truly are at all. They exist as predictable equations, reacting rather than acting, walking compendiums of aphorisms and taboos, reflexes and syndromes, Surely the gods must chuckle at the ironic spectacle of robots fancying themselves free, but still, when finally the embodied consciousness rises above the pain-pleasure principle of nature, then the true meaning of freedom is made apparent at last. Action versus reaction. We exist in order that we may become something more than we are, not through favorable circumstance or auspicious occurrence, but through an inner search for increased awareness. To be, to become, these are the commandments of evolving life, which is going somewhere, aspires to some unsealed heights, and the awakened soul answers the call, seeks, grows, expands. To do less is to sink into the reactive prison of the ego, with all its pain, suffering, limitation, decay, and death. The man who lives through reaction to the world about him is the victim of every change in his environment. Now happy, now sad. Now victorious, now defeated. Affected, but never affecting. He may live many years in this manner, wrapped with sensory perception and the ups and downs of his surface self. But one day pain so outweighs pleasure that he suddenly perceives his ego is illusory, a product of outside circumstances only. Then he either sinks into complete animal lethargy or, turning away from the senses, seeks inner awareness and self-mastery. Then he is on the road to really living, truly becoming. Then he begins to uncover his real potential. Then he discovers the miracle of his own consciousness, the magic in his mind. Mastery over life is not attained by dominion over material things, but by mental perception of their true cause in nature. The wise man does not attempt to bend the world to fit his way or to coerce events into a replica of his desires, but instead strives for a higher consciousness that enables him to perceive the secret cause behind all things. Thus he finds a prominent place in events. By his utter harmony with them, he actually appears to be molding them. He moves effortlessly through the most strenuous action, the most perilous times, because his attunement with the mental force that controls the universe guides him to perform the work that needs to be done. Electromagnetic mind. This mental force that controls the universe may be called anything you like and visualized any way you choose. The important thing is to understand that it exists, to know something about how it works, what your relationship to it is. It might, for instance, be likened to an enormous electromagnetic field. All conscious forms of life then would be tiny electromagnetic fields within the universal field and finding positions within it, each according to the kind and equality of its field. Where each individual field would wind up within the main field then would be a matter of inexorable law and absolutely unavoidable, as is illustrated by the millions of people who perform the same task over and over with absolutely the same results, almost as if following ritual. Perhaps they are always sick, always defeated, just barely misers, perhaps always broke, always out of a job. If we give just the slightest reflection of our own lives, we cannot help but be startled by how we seem dogged by the same situation in all things, year after year, time after time. This deadly recurrence is the source of most frustration and mental illness, is the bottom root of all failure. Yet it is avoidable. And the way by which it is avoidable brings complete emancipation of the mind and spirit. For the tiny electromagnetic field has inherent within it the ability to change the kind and quality of its field, so that it will be moved about within the main field with all the power and sureness of the main field until it arrives at the position its new quality of consciousness demands. The important thing to remember about this illustration is that the tiny electromagnetic field does not move itself. It is moved by the large field, and behind its movement lies all the power of the large field. Any attempt by it to move itself is obviously futile, since it is held in place by a power infinitely greater than itself. And it is held where it is because of what it is. The moment a change occurs within itself, It is moved by a power outside itself to a new position in the field, one in keeping with its new potential. The mental world. The foregoing is admittedly an analogy, but nevertheless, S.W. Tromp, in his remarkable book, Psychical Physics, has proved beyond all doubt that the human being exudes certain electromagnetic fields, that the earth itself gives off an electromagnetic field, and his illustrations are so impeccably documented that there cannot possibly be any scientific quarrel with them. We indeed may be on the very threshold of scientific proof of those invisible areas of human aspiration that have hitherto been the province of philosophers, diviners, and priests. Departments of investigation into the paranormal abilities of the human psyche have been established at our leading universities, and it is now surely only a matter of time until we are faced with the final irrevocable proof of our intuitive perception, the power of mind over matter. It is a mental world we live in, not a physical one at all. The physical is merely an extension of the mental, and an imperfect extension at that. Everything we see, hear, and feel is not a hard and inescapable fact at all, but only the imperfect revelation to the senses of an idea held in mind. Preoccupation with sensory experience has focused attention on effects instead of causes, has led scientific investigation down a blind alley where everything grows smaller into infinity or larger into infinity and walls man off from the secrets that lie behind life. It is not the planets and stars, the elements and winds, or even the existence of life itself that is the miracle that demands our attention. It is consciousness. It is the mere fact of being, the ability to say, I. Consciousness is an indisputable fact, the greatest miracle of all, and all the sights and sounds of the world are merely side effect. The hidden. I. To be conscious is to be conscious. There are not different kinds. The I that is in your neighbor is the exact same I within you. It may appear to be different through being attached to different sensory experience, but that is only because it has allowed itself to be conditioned by such experience. In point of actual fact, consciousness is never the result of experience, but the cause instead. And wherever we find it, it is primarily aware of existing, of being I. There is only one basic consciousness in all creation. It takes up its residence in all things, appears to be different according to the things it enters into, but in essence is never changed at all. It is intelligence, awareness, energy, power, creativeness, the stuff from which all things are made. It is the Alpha and Omega of existence, first cause. It is you. Everything in nature contains all the powers of nature. Everything is made of one hidden stuff, wrote Ralph Waldo Emerson. He pierced the veil, perceived behind the sense-enamoring dance of nature's myriad forms the workings of the one mind and one intelligence from which all life and aspiration spring. There can be no inner peace or surety of action without this basic spiritual knowledge. The man who lives isolated from the roots of his being has cut himself off from the source of all power and dwells alone and without resource in a hostile and threatening world. Let him once perceive the true nature of life and his relationship to it, and he soon sees that the world always reflects his thoughts. The mask. The surface mind or sense self or ego is the villain of the play that is being enacted on the human stage at present. Man as a form of life is sufficiently evolved so as to understand his separateness and uniqueness. He looks in the mirror and understands that the reflected animal is he. He is concerned with the appearance and welfare of this animal and ponders its relationships with the world and others. He does not truly understand what he is, only that he is conscious and confined within a particular body, and the experience and knowledge he acquires, together